Don't you die on me!" Emma's small hands trembled as she pressed them against the chest of the unconscious man sprawled across 3 first-class seats. The plane lurched violently to the right, sending an empty oxygen mask swinging like a pendulum above her head. Panic erupted throughout the cabin screams, prayers, the sound of luggage tumbling from overhead bins, but Emma heard none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the ashen face of William Harrison, the cold, distant millionaire who had barely acknowledged her existence when she'd boarded Flight 2187 just 3 hours earlier. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she continued compressions. "You can't die without telling me why. Why did you have that photo? Why were you watching me?" 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, as the aircraft battled through the worst turbulence the pilot had seen in 27 years of flying, a 12-year-old girl from the poorest trailer park in Kentucky fought to save the life of a man worth more than her entire community combined. She had no idea that his next words, if he lived to speak them, would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Emma Reynolds clutched her backpack tightly against her chest as she shuffled down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 777. Each step deeper into the plane's cabin felt like entering an alien world. The soft blue lighting, the hushed conversations, the flight attendants with their perfect smiles and crisp uniforms, all of it was so far removed from her daily life in Coleridge, Kentucky, that she might as well have been walking on the moon. "Excuse me, honey?" A flight attendant with a nameplate reading Patricia touched Emma's shoulder. "Are you traveling alone?" Emma nodded, her throat suddenly too dry to speak. The woman's eyes softened with a mix of concern and something else. Was it pity? Emma had seen that look countless times before, especially since Grandma Martha had gotten sick. "Let me see your boarding pass." Patricia extended her hand, her red nails gleaming under the cabin lights. She studied the slip of paper and raised an eyebrow. "Seat 14A? That's right this way? Sweetie?" As they moved past the curtains separating first class from economy, Emma couldn't help but glance at the passengers in the premium section. Most were absorbed in laptops or reclining with eye masks already in place. But one man caught her attention. Unlike the others, he wasn't working or sleeping. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring out the window with such intensity that Emma wondered if he could see something no one else could. He was older, maybe in his early 60s, with silver hair that contrasted sharply with his tailored black suit. A heavy gold watch peeked from beneath his starched cuff, and a leather briefcase sat securely between his polished shoes. Everything about him radiated power and wealth. Yet, there was something in his expression, a flicker of something that seemed out of place. Vulnerability. Regret. Before Emma could decide, he turned and met her gaze. For one electric moment, their eyes locked. The man's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something Emma couldn't quite name. Then, as suddenly as it had happened, he looked away, his face hardening into a mask of indifference. This flight, her first ever, wasn't something she'd planned or saved for. It had arrived in the form of a certified letter 3 weeks ago, along with a pre-purchase ticket and a brief cryptic note. "Your presence is requested in Boston regarding an inheritance matter. All expenses paid. Discretion advised." Grandma Martha had been suspicious immediately. "Sounds like one of those scams that's always on the news," she'd said, her voice raspy from years of cigarettes and, more recently, the treatments that left her too weak to get out of bed most days. "Nobody leaves money to folks they don't know." But the letter had included details, specific details about Emma's father that only someone who knew him could have known. Her father, Thomas Wilson, who had died when Emma was just 4 years old. A man she remembered more as a feeling than a face. Warm hands, a rumbling laugh, the smell of peppermint and motor oil. And so, after weeks of debate, multiple calls to the Boston law firm listed on the letterhead, Edwards, Montgomery, and Associates, serving distinguished clientele since 1972, and a visit from a notary who verified that yes, this was legitimate. Grandma had reluctantly agreed to let Emma make the journey. "Just be careful," she'd warned, as the medical transport prepared to take her back to the hospital for another round of treatments. "The world ain't always kind to girls who look like you, especially when they're alone." Those words echoed in Emma's mind as the plane began to taxi. She was 12 years old, flying across several states to meet strangers who claimed she was entitled to something left by someone connected to her father. It sounded like the beginning of one of the mystery novels she devoured by the dozen, borrowed from the mobile library that visited her trailer park every other Thursday. Except this wasn't fiction. This was her life, suddenly taking a turn she never could have imagined. The engines roared to life, pressing Emma back against her seat. She closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. Whatever awaited her in Boston, she would face it with the same determination that had gotten her through everything else. Her father's death, her mother's disappearance 3 years later, the challenges of being raised by a grandmother whose love was as fierce as her health was fragile. As the plane lifted off the ground, Emma felt a curious mixture of fear and hope. For the first time in her young life, she was leaving behind everything familiar, the worn trailer with its perpetually leaking roof, the corner store where Mr. Jenkins sometimes slipped her an extra candy bar for being such a good student, the community center where she spent afternoons when Grandma had doctor appointments, her school, where teachers alternately praised her intelligence and lamented her attitude problem when she questioned their low expectations. But there was freedom in this departure, too. For a few precious days, she would be more than that poor Reynolds girl or the kid with no parents. She would be a traveler, an adventurer, someone with a mysterious appointment in a distant city. The thought made her smile despite her nervousness. The seatbelt sign dinged off around her. Passengers began to settle in for the 3-hour journey. Some pulled out tablets or books. Others adjusted travel pillows or requested drinks from the flight attendants now moving through the cabin. Emma reached into her backpack and removed the book she'd brought for the flight, a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden that had belonged to her father. It was one of the few things of his that she possessed, and its pages were filled with his handwritten notes in the margins. Sometimes, when she missed him most acutely, she would read those notes and imagine him reading the same words, sitting in the same spot she did, his thoughts reaching across time to connect with hers. She was just opening to her bookmarked page when a commotion from first class caught her attention. The man who had stared at her, the one with the silver hair and expensive suit, was standing now, his voice raised in evident displeasure. "This is unacceptable," he was saying to a harried-looking flight attendant. "I specifically requested a vacant seat beside me. I'm not accustomed to sharing my space with strangers." "I understand, Mr. "Harrison?" the attendant replied, her professional smile never wavering. "But I'm afraid with today's configuration, this is the best we can do. Mr. Thornton is also a Platinum Elite member. And do you have any idea who I am?" The man, Mr. Harrison, apparently lowered his voice, but the intensity of his words carried back to where Emma sat. "One call from me to your corporate office and, Richard, please." The second passenger, a middle-aged man in a simple gray suit, spoke up. "If it's so important to you, I'm happy to move." "That's not the point, James." Harrison shook his head. "It's about respect for commitments made. When American Airlines promises me something, I expect them to deliver." Emma couldn't help but roll her eyes. The problems of the wealthy never ceased to amaze her. Here was a man upset about having to sit next to someone in the most luxurious section of the plane, while she was grateful just to have a row to herself in economy. But there was something else about the exchange that nagged at her the way Harrison had said the name James, with a familiarity that suggested these weren't two strangers having an awkward encounter. And the other man, though outwardly calm, held himself with a tension that spoke of complicated history. The situation resolved itself when a flight attendant escorted James Thornton to a different seat in first class, leaving Harrison to his coveted isolation. As he sat back down, his gaze swept the cabin and, for the second time, connected with Emma's. This time, she didn't look away. Something about his entitlement, his coldness, made her want to challenge him. She held his stare until, surprisingly, it was he who broke the connection. Turning abruptly to speak to a flight attendant, Emma returned to her book, but the words blurred before her eyes. Her mind kept returning to Harrison's face in that moment of eye contact. Not the arrogance or irritation he'd displayed during the seating dispute, but something altogether different. For just an instant, she could have sworn she saw recognition, but that was impossible. What would a man like William Harrison, who complained about the proximity of other first-class passengers, know of a girl from Coleridge who wore second-hand clothes and had never been on a plane before today? The thought was so preposterous that she almost laughed aloud. Clearly, the excitement of the journey was making her imagination work overtime. She forced herself to focus on her book, losing herself in the story of another orphaned girl finding her way in an unfamiliar world. An hour into the flight, as the flight attendants began serving drinks, Emma noticed Harrison standing again. This time, he moved with purpose toward the lavatory at the front of the first-class cabin. As he passed by the dividing curtain, something fell from his jacket pocket, a small folded piece of paper that fluttered to the floor just on the economy side of the partition. Without thinking, Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and slipped into the aisle. She picked up the paper, intending to return it. Perhaps it was important, a business card, a receipt, a note. As she straightened, holding the folded square, a strange impulse overcame her. Later, she would question why she did it. What instinct had prompted her to cross a line she knew was wrong? But in that moment, standing alone in the aisle with no one watching, she carefully unfolded the paper. It wasn't a business card or a receipt. It was a photograph, worn at the creases as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. The image showed a young couple standing before a modest house, their arms around each other, both smiling broadly at the camera. The woman was petite with close-cropped hair and a dimple in her right cheek. The man was tall and lean, wearing faded jeans and a University of Kentucky t-shirt. Emma's heart stopped. She knew that dimple. She saw it in her own reflection every day. And the man there was no mistaking him. It was her father. Her hands began to tremble so violently that she nearly dropped the photo. Why would William Harrison, a white millionaire businessman, be carrying a picture of her parents? The couple in the photo looked young, probably in their early 20s, suggesting the picture had been taken years before Emma was born, before her father died, before her mother vanished. The lavatory door opened. Emma quickly refolded the photo and stepped back toward her seat, her mind racing. Harrison emerged, his expression troubled. For a moment, he paused, patting his pockets as if searching for something. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the floor. Emma slid back into her seat, the photo clutched in her trembling hand. She should return it. She knew that. But how could she explain having looked at it? And more importantly, how could she give it back without asking the question now burning in her mind? How did you know my parents? She watched as Harrison returned to his seat, still patting his pockets with increasing agitation. He signaled to a flight attendant, and soon several crew members were discreetly searching the first-class cabin floor. Emma's heart pounded against her ribs. She felt like a thief. Though what she'd stolen wasn't the photo itself, but the knowledge of its existence, knowledge that connected her somehow to this cold, wealthy stranger. As the search continued fruitlessly in first class, Emma made a decision. She would return the photo, but not yet. But not? First, she needed to understand why Harrison had it. Was this connected to the mysterious inheritance she was traveling to Boston to discuss? Was Harrison himself involved in whatever had prompted that cryptic letter? She carefully placed the photo inside her copy of The Secret Garden, marking the spot where she'd been reading. Whatever this meant, she needed time to process it, to think through her next steps. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, causing the cabin to shudder. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a chime. Around her, passengers reached for their drinks and secured loose items. Emma buckled her seatbelt mechanically, her thoughts still consumed by the discovery. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking," a calm voice announced over the intercom. "We're experiencing some light turbulence as we pass through a weather system. I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Our flight attendants will temporarily suspend service until we reach smoother air. We anticipate this should only last about 15 minutes. Thank you for your patience." The turbulence intensified, the plane dipping and rising like a boat on rough waters. Emma gripped the armrests, her stomach lurching with each drop. She had never experienced anything like this, had no frame of reference for the sensation of being suspended in air at the mercy of invisible currents. For the first time since boarding, she felt a flash of real fear, not about the photo or Harrison, but about the fundamental vulnerability of hurtling through the sky in a metal tube thousands of feet above the earth. "It's perfectly normal," said a gentle voice beside her. Emma turned to find an elderly woman had taken the aisle seat in her row, a passenger who must have moved during the drink service when Emma was distracted by the photo. "I've been flying since the 70s, the woman continued, her southern accent as comforting as a warm blanket. "Back when smoking was allowed, and they served real food on china plates. A little bumpy air is nothing to worry about." The woman had silver-gray hair styled in a neat bob, and she wore a matching lavender sweater set that reminded Emma of something Grandma Martha might wear to church. Her liver-spotted hands were adorned with several rings, including a wedding band that looked too large for her slender finger. "I'm Grace, by the way. Grace Sullivan." She offered Emma a peppermint from a small tin. "These help with the ear pressure and settle the stomach, too." "Thanks." Emma accepted the candy. "I'm Emma Reynolds. First flight?" Grace asked knowingly. Emma nodded, slightly embarrassed at how obvious her nervousness must be. "Well, you picked a beautiful day for it. Once we get above these clouds, the view is going to be spectacular." Grace patted Emma's hand. "Are you traveling to Boston for pleasure or business?" The question made Emma pause. How could she explain her situation to a stranger? It sounded implausible even to her own ears. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Sort of family business, I guess." "Ah," Grace nodded sagely. "Family business often is complicated. I'm visiting my son and his husband. They moved to Boston 5 years ago for his work. He's in finance, very successful. And they've been after me to visit ever since. Finally decided to take the plunge for my 75th birthday next week." "Happy early birthday," Emma said, grateful for the distraction from both the turbulence and her troubled thoughts. "Thank you, sweetheart. You know, you remind me of my granddaughter. She's a bit older, 17 now, but she has that same look in her eyes, like she's taking in everything, missing nothing." Grace's gaze was shrewd, despite her grandmotherly appearance. That kind of awareness serves a person well in this world, especially when they have to grow up faster than they should. There was something in the way she said it, not with pity, but with recognition, that made Emma feel seen in a way few adults ever saw her. It was both comforting and unsettling. The plane steadied as they climbed above the weather system. Sunshine streamed through the windows, transforming the cabin from its artificial dimness to a space filled with natural light. The seatbelt sign dinged off again. "What did I tell you?" Grace gestured to the window. "Spectacular." Emma looked out to see an endless expanse of fluffy white clouds stretching to the horizon, gilded by sunlight. It was like a landscape from another world, pristine, peaceful, impossibly beautiful. For a moment, she forgot about Harrison, the photo, the mysterious inheritance. She was simply a girl experiencing the magic of flight for the first time, sharing it with a kind stranger who treated her like a person worth knowing. The moment was shattered by a commotion from first-class raised voices, the sound of movement, a flight attendant rushing forward with purpose. Emma couldn't see what was happening, but she could feel the shift in energy throughout the cabin as passengers craned their necks and whispered to one another. "Excuse me." Grace flagged down a passing flight attendant. "Is everything all right up front?" "Just a passenger feeling unwell," the young man replied with practiced reassurance. "Nothing to worry about." But his tight expression and the way he hurried back toward first class told a different story. Something serious was happening, and the crew was trying to manage it without alarming the other passengers. Emma's thoughts immediately went to Harrison. She didn't know why there were dozens of other passengers in first class, but somehow she was certain he was at the center of whatever was unfolding. Was it possible? Was this connected to the photo, to her parents, to her presence on this flight? The irrational thought that she had somehow caused this through her discovery of the photo flashed through her mind. She shook it off. That was magical thinking. The kind grandma gently discouraged when Emma was younger and believed she could influence events through ritual or thought alone. "I should see if they need help," Grace said suddenly, unbuckling her seatbelt. "I was a nurse for 47 years before I retired. Critical care." "Ma'am, please remain seated." The flight attendant who had spoken to them earlier reappeared. "We have the situation under control. Young man," Grace fixed him with a look that brooked no argument, "I've been handling medical emergencies since before you were born. Now, is it a cardiac event, seizure, or allergic reaction?" The flight attendant hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the potential value of professional medical assistance. "Sir." Another flight attendant called from the front of the economy section. "We need that medical kit now." That settled it. The first attendant hurried to retrieve the kit while Grace, with surprising agility for her age, moved toward first class. Without conscious decision, Emma found herself following. Something pulled her forward: curiosity, concern, or perhaps a deeper instinct connected to the photo still hidden in her book. "Emma, honey, stay in your seat," Grace called over her shoulder. But Emma couldn't. Whatever was happening, she felt compelled to witness it. As they reached the partition between cabins, the scene in first class became visible. A cluster of people surrounded a single seat, Harrison's seat. The businessman was slumped forward, his face ashen, his breathing labored. James Thornton, the passenger he'd earlier objected to sitting beside, was supporting him while a flight attendant held an oxygen mask to his face. "Possible cardiac event," someone was saying. "Does anyone have aspirin? Sir, can you hear me?" Another attendant was speaking directly to Harrison, who seemed only semi-conscious. "Mr. Harrison, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Grace stepped forward with the authority of decades in medicine. "I'm a registered nurse. Let me through, please." The crew made way for her immediately, relief evident on their faces. As she bent to examine Harrison, his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, his gaze unfocused. Then his attention sharpened, moving past Grace to where Emma stood at the edge of the gathering. Recognition flashed across his features, followed by something that looked like desperation. His lips moved beneath the oxygen mask, forming words Emma couldn't hear. He struggled to sit up, reaching toward her with a trembling hand. "Sir, please remain still," Grace instructed, gently but firmly pressing him back against the seat. "You need to stay calm." But Harrison's eyes remained fixed on Emma, intense and pleading. He pulled the oxygen mask aside. "The photo," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Please." A flight attendant replaced the mask, but not before Emma heard those words. A confirmation that whatever medical crisis Harrison was experiencing, it was somehow connected to the image she'd found, the image of her parents. "What photo?" Grace asked, checking Harrison's pulse at his wrist. He shook his head weakly, still staring at Emma with that strange, desperate expression. "Young lady." James Thornton addressed Emma directly. "Do you know what he's talking about?" All eyes turned to her. She felt frozen in place, caught between truth and self-preservation. If she admitted to having the photo, she would have to explain how she'd obtained it, by taking something that wasn't hers, by looking at something private. But if she denied it, She might be withholding something important from a man in medical distress. Before she could decide, the plane lurched violently. The turbulence they'd experienced earlier returned with greater intensity, sending those standing stumbling into seats and each other. The cabin lights flickered. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments throughout the plane, dangling like bizarre fruits. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The intercom crackled. "We've encountered severe turbulence. All passengers and crew must return to their seats immediately and fasten their seat belts. I repeat, return to your seats immediately." The urgency in the captain's voice was unmistakable. This was not a routine announcement. Whatever they had flown into was serious. The flight attendants began ushering people back to their assigned seats, their movements efficient despite the rocking of the cabin. Grace spoke rapidly to the crew about Harrison's condition, before reluctantly heading back toward economy. "Come on, Emma," she said, taking the girl's arm. "We need to sit down." But as they turned to go, Harrison lunged forward, grabbing Emma's wrist with surprising strength for someone in his condition. "Wait," he wheezed, the oxygen mask askew. "Please, important." "Sir, you need to let her go and put your mask back on," a flight attendant insisted, trying to separate them. Harrison's grip tightened, his eyes bloodshot and desperate bored into Emma's. "Thomas and Sarah," he said, the names sending a shock through her system. Her parents' names. "You're their daughter. I need to—" Whatever he needed, Emma didn't hear it. The plane dropped suddenly, as if the floor had vanished beneath them. For a sickening moment, they were in free fall. Passengers screamed. Unsecured items flew through the cabin. Then, with a bone-jarring jolt, they stabilized, though the violent shaking continued. In the chaos, Harrison's grip had broken. The flight attendants were now frantically securing him in his seat, strapping the oxygen mask properly to his face. Grace pulled Emma back toward economy, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining her balance in the turbulent conditions. "Seatbelt now!" Grace's nurse's voice brooked no argument as they reached their row. Emma complied mechanically, her mind reeling not from the physical turbulence, but from Harrison's words. He knew her parents. He recognized her as their daughter, and whatever he needed to tell her seemed vitally important to him, important enough that even in a medical crisis, even as the plane bucked and shuddered around them, it was his primary concern. The cabin lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in an eerie blue glow. Oxygen masks swayed above every seat. The plane seemed to be fighting its way through something massive and hostile. "Is this normal?" Emma asked, her voice small against the cacophony of creaking metal and frightened voices. Grace's hand found hers in the dim light, squeezing reassuringly. "No, honey, it's not. But these planes are built to withstand much worse. We're going to be fine." Her calm certainty was a lifeline in the chaos. Emma clung to it, trying to steady her breathing as the plane continued its violent passage through the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, noticeably more tense than before. "We are diverting to Portland International Airport in Maine due to both the severe weather conditions and a medical emergency on board. Please remain in your seats with your seat belts fastened. Our estimated landing time is approximately 40 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Portland, Maine. They weren't even halfway to Boston. Whatever was happening to Harrison was serious enough, combined with the weather, to force an emergency landing. Emma thought of the photo in her book, of the names he had spoken, of the recognition in his eyes when he saw her. None of it made sense, yet all of it seemed connected to the mysterious summons that had put her on this flight in the first place. The next 30 minutes were the longest of Emma's young life. The turbulence gradually subsided as the plane descended to a lower altitude, but the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers and offering reassurance where needed. Several times they hurried to first class with equipment from the medical kit, their expressions growing more concerned with each trip. Beside her, Grace maintained a calm exterior, though Emma noticed she was clutching her crucifix necklace and moving her lips in silent prayer. Outside the windows, the pristine white landscape of clouds had given way to a menacing gray mass that obscured any view of the earth below. "Is Mr. Harrison going to be okay?" Emma finally asked, breaking the silence between them. Grace looked at her curiously. "You know him?" "No," Emma admitted, "but he knew my parents somehow." The older woman's eyebrows rose. "Is that what he was trying to tell you?" Emma nodded, then hesitated. Should she mention the photo, the mysterious letter that had brought her on this journey, before she could decide? The captain's voice returned. "We are beginning our final descent into Portland. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." The announcement was followed by instructions about proper landing positions in case of emergency. Though delivered in the same professional tone as all previous communications, the very fact that they were being given heightened the sense that this was not a routine situation. As the plane broke through the cloud cover, Emma caught her first glimpse of land since leaving Kentucky, a vast expanse of green and blue, with the coastline visible in the distance. In the near distance, she could make out what must be the airport, a cluster of buildings and runways carved out of the landscape. The descent was steep and fast, suggesting urgency beyond the standard procedures for an unscheduled landing. Emma's ears popped painfully despite the peppermint Grace had given her. The cabin remained eerily quiet, passengers too tense for conversation, many clutching armrests or each other's hands as they approached the runway. The landing itself was rougher than Emma had expected, the plane bouncing once before its wheels firmly gripped the tarmac. The engines roared as they reversed thrust, the deceleration pressing everyone forward against their seat belts. Outside, rain lashed the windows, blurring the view of emergency vehicles already positioned along the runway, their lights flashing through the gloom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed at Portland International Airport," the captain announced, his relief evident even through the professional veneer. "Local time is 2:17 p.m. Medical personnel are boarding to attend to our passenger requiring assistance. All other passengers, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until further instructions." Almost immediately, the forward door opened. Cold air rushed into the cabin as paramedics boarded, directed quickly to first class by the flight attendants. Emma strained to see what was happening, but the partition blocked her view. "They're taking him off the plane," a passenger across the aisle reported, having a better angle. "He doesn't look good." Emma felt a sudden, irrational panic. If Harrison left the plane now, she might never learn what he knew about her parents, why he had their photo, or what connection existed between them. Without thinking, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. "Emma, Grace reached for her. "You can't." But Emma was already moving, slipping into the aisle and pushing forward against the explicit instructions to remain seated. A flight attendant stepped into her path. "Miss, you need to return to your seat immediately." "Ooh." "Please," Emma said, desperation making her voice crack. "I need to talk to Mr. Harrison. It's important. It's about my parents." The attendant's expression softened slightly, but she stood firm. "I understand, but right now, Mr. Harrison needs medical attention. The best thing you can do is—" A commotion from first class interrupted her. Raised voices, urgent commands from the paramedics, then, clear above the din, Harrison's voice, strained but insistent. "The girl, I need to speak to the girl." The flight attendant turned, her professional composure momentarily broken by surprise. One of the paramedics appeared at the partition. "Is there a young lady here?" he asked, scanning the economy cabin. "Mr. Harrison is asking for someone." "Me?" Emma said, stepping forward. "He wants to talk to me." The paramedic looked skeptical. "You know this man?" "No, but—" Emma hesitated, then reached into her backpack and removed her book. From between its pages, she carefully extracted the photograph. "He dropped this. It's a picture of my parents." The paramedic studied her for a moment, then nodded. Quickly, then, "We need to get him to the hospital." Guided by the flight attendant, Emma moved into first class. Harrison was on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, an IV already inserted into his arm. His skin had a grayish cast that even Emma, with no medical training, recognized as dangerous, but his eyes were alert, tracking her movement as she approached. "Sir," the paramedic said, "we really need to move you now." Harrison pulled the mask aside. "1 minute," he gasped. "Private." The paramedics exchanged glances with the flight crew. After a moment of silent communication, they stepped back slightly, giving Harrison and Emma a small bubble of relative privacy amidst the crisis. Emma moved closer to the stretcher, the photo clutched in her hand. "I found this when it fell from your pocket," she said quietly. "Why do you have a picture of my parents?" Harrison's breathing was labored, each word clearly an effort. "Not much time," he said. "Listen carefully." He gestured weakly for her to come closer. Emma leaned in until her ear was near his lips. The words he whispered were so soft she could barely hear them over the ambient noise of the plane and the medical equipment. But once she processed them, their impact hit her with physical force, making her jerk back, eyes wide with shock. "That's not possible," she said, her voice trembling. "You're lying." Harrison shook his head weakly. "Ask your grandmother about July 17, 1992. She knows." His hand fumbled at his jacket pocket. "Take this. Everything explained inside. Boston lawyers will help." He pressed something into her palm, a small key on a plain metal ring. Before Emma could ask any more questions, his eyes rolled back, and alarms began sounding from the portable monitors attached to him. "He's crashing," one paramedic announced, pushing Emma aside. "We need to move now." In a blur of coordinated urgency, the paramedics lifted the stretcher and rushed Harrison from the plane. Emma stood frozen, the key clutched in one hand, the photo in the other. Tears streaming down her face, without her even realizing she was crying. What Harrison had whispered, those few impossible words, had shattered the foundation of everything she believed about herself, her family, her very identity. If what he said was true, nothing would ever be the same again. A gentle hand on her shoulder broke through her shock. Grace stood beside her, concern evident in her wise eyes. "What did he say to you, child?" she asked softly. Emma looked at her, then at the key in her palm, then back at the open door through which Harrison had been rushed. The words he had whispered replayed in her mind, each syllable a seismic shift in her understanding of the world. "He said," Emma swallowed hard, hardly able to form the words, "he said, he's my father." The next hours passed in a fog of confusion and bureaucracy. Once the immediate crisis of Harrison's medical emergency had been addressed, the reality of an unscheduled international landing began to unfold. Passengers were deplaned and directed to a holding area in Portland's modest terminal, while arrangements were made for them to continue their journey, some on the same aircraft once it was cleared, others on different flights that would be rerouted to accommodate them. Emma sat apart from the crowd, the photo and key her only company as she tried to process Harrison's revelation. William Harrison, a wealthy businessman in his 60s, had claimed to be her father, whom she had mourned since age 4, her father, whose grave she had visited every year on his birthday. It was impossible, absurd, and yet she studied the photo again, searching for answers in the frozen smiles of the young couple. The man she had always believed was her father, Thomas Wilson, stood with his arm around the woman Emma knew was her mother, Sarah. They looked happy, in love, their whole lives ahead of them. Nothing in the image suggested deception or complication. But there was the key, and there were Harrison's words. "Ask your grandmother about July 17, 1992. What had happened on that date? Emma had been born in March of 1993, roughly 8 months later. The timing sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the terminal's aggressive air conditioning. "Mind if I join you?" Grace stood before her, holding 2 cups of what smelled like hot chocolate. Emma nodded numbly, and the older woman settled beside her on the plastic airport seating. "Thought you could use this," Grace said, handing her one of the cups. "Sugar and warmth, good for shock." Emma accepted the drink gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the paper cup. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the controlled chaos of the terminal as airline staff attempted to manage the disrupted travel plans of nearly 300 passengers. "Want to talk about it?" Grace finally asked, her tone making it clear that no was an acceptable answer. Emma considered the question. She barely knew this woman, a chance seatmate on a disrupted flight. And yet Grace had shown her nothing but kindness, and there was something in her manner that invited confidence. More practically, Emma had no one else to talk to, and the thoughts swirling in her head threatened to drown her if not released. "I don't understand how it could be true," she said finally. "My father was Thomas Wilson. I have pictures of him, memories, even though I was young when he died. How could this William Harrison possibly be my father?" Grace took a thoughtful sip of her hot chocolate before responding. "Family is complicated, honey, more complicated than most people like to admit. Sometimes there are secrets kept for all kinds of reasons, some protective, some selfish, some a mix of both. But if William Harrison is really my father, then who was Thomas Wilson? Why would my mother and grandmother lie to me my whole life? I can't answer that, Grace said gently. But I can tell you this. In my 74 years, I've learned that most people aren't villains in their own stories. Whatever happened between your mother, the man you knew as your father, and this Harrison fellow, I'd bet they all thought they were doing the right thing at the time. Emma stared down at the photo. My mom disappeared when I was 7. Just left one day and never came back. Grandma says she had troubles, but she never explains what kind. If she lied about who my father was, what else did she lie about? The weight of these questions she had no way of answering in an airport terminal in Portland, pressed down on her like a physical force. Tears threatened again, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough. "What are you going to do now?" Grace asked. Emma clutched the key in her palm. "I need to get to Boston. The lawyers there, they must know something about all this. And then I need to talk to my grandmother." Before Grace could respond, an announcement came over the terminal's PA system. "Attention passengers of American Airlines Flight 2187. We have arranged for a recovery aircraft to transport you to Boston Logan International Airport. Boarding will begin in approximately 1 hour. Please proceed to Gate 3 for pre-boarding procedures. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your patience." A ripple of relief passed through the crowd of stranded travelers. Emma felt it too, but it was tempered by another concern. "What about Mr. Harrison?" she asked. Did they say anything about his condition?" Grace shook her head. "Not officially, but I spoke with one of the paramedics when they came back for some equipment they'd left on the plane. He said they took him to Maine Medical Center in Portland. That's all I know." Emma made a sudden decision. "I need to see him before we leave." "Honey, I don't think that's possible. The hospital is in the city, and we're due to board in an hour. But what if he dies?" The words burst from Emma with unexpected force. What if he dies? And I never get answers. Never find out if what he said is true. Never learn why he had that photo or what happened with my mother. The possibility that Harrison might die before she could question him properly hadn't fully registered until this moment. Whatever his relation to her father, as he claimed, or something else entirely, he was her only link to understanding the mystery that had suddenly engulfed her life. Grace studied her with those kind, shrewd eyes. "Let me see what I can find out," she said after a moment. "Wait here." She rose and made her way to the airline staff desk, where she engaged in what appeared to be an earnest conversation with one of the agents. Emma watched anxiously, unable to hear what was being said but reading the body language, Grace's persuasive gestures, the agent's initial resistance, then a softening, a nod, the typing on a computer terminal. After several minutes, Grace returned, a small smile on her face. "Good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that Mr. Harrison is stable. They've admitted him to the cardiac unit for observation and treatment, but he's conscious and in no immediate danger." Relief flooded through Emma, surprising her with its intensity. "And the bad news?" "There's simply no way for you to visit him before our flight leaves. The hospital is 20 minutes from here, and with security procedures for the new flight, there just isn't time." Emma's shoulders slumped. Though relieved that Harrison wasn't dying, The prospect of continuing to Boston without speaking to him again felt wrong. How could she face whatever awaited her there without more information? But Grace continued. I did manage to get them to call the hospital. I told them you were family. A little white lie for a good cause. They're going to ask if Mr. Harrison can take a phone call from you before we board. Hope sparked within Emma. Really? Thank you. Don't thank me yet. They need to check with his doctors first to make sure he's up to it. And even if he is, you'll only have a few minutes. Grace's expression grew serious. Think carefully about what you want to ask him. Emma, make those minutes count. Emma nodded, her mind already racing through the questions she needed answered. Was he really her father? How was that possible? What happened with her mother? Why had he never been part of her life? Why was she being summoned to Boston now? What did the key open? Too many questions for a brief phone call with a man recovering from a cardiac event. She would need to prioritize, to focus on what mattered most. As they waited for word from the hospital, Emma's thoughts turned to Grandma Martha. Should she call her? Tell her what had happened? What Harrison had claimed? The idea made her stomach clench with anxiety. If what Harrison said was true, her grandmother had participated in a lifelong deception. That conversation needed to happen face to face, not over a long-distance phone line with airline announcements in the background. Miss Reynolds, a staff member approached with a cordless phone. We have Mr. Harrison for you. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. She accepted the phone with trembling hands, moving a short distance away for privacy. Hello, she said, her voice smaller than she intended. Emma! Harrison's voice was weak, but clear. Thank you for calling. Are you really my father? The question tumbled out before she could stop it, before she could consider a more strategic approach. A pause, then a sigh that seemed to carry decades of regret. Yes, biologically speaking, I am. The confirmation, stated so plainly, sent a wave of dizziness through her. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. How my father, Thomas Wilson. He was my father. Everyone says I look just like him. Thomas was a good man, Harrison said, his voice warming with what sounded like genuine respect. Your mother's colleague at first, then her friend? After what happened between your mother and me. Thomas stepped in. He loved Sarah. When she found out she was pregnant, he offered to marry her, to give the child, to give you his name, his protection. But why? Why would he do that? It was 1992. Emma, I was married, wealthy. Your mother was young, just starting her career. When our relationship ended badly, she was alone and vulnerable. Thomas provided a solution that seemed best for everyone, especially for you. Emma struggled to process this information. The man she had called father her entire life had not been her biological parent, but had chosen to claim her anyway. The knowledge was both painful and precious. Did you even want me? The question emerged raw and unfiltered, giving voice to the hurt child within her. Harrison's response came after a long pause, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know about you until after you were born. Sarah, she made a choice not to tell me. By the time I found out, she and Thomas were married. You had his name, his love. You were part of a family that could give you what I couldn't then, And what about now? Why am I being called to Boston about an inheritance matter? Why were you on my flight? Why do you have a photo of my parents? The lawyers in Boston work for me, Harrison admitted. When I learned of your grandmother's illness, I realized it was time for you to know the truth, to have choices I couldn't give you before. The inheritance is real. I've established a trust for you. Educational expenses, housing, whatever you need. The thought of this stranger, this man claiming to be her father, monitoring her life from a distance, knowing about Grandma's cancer, making financial arrangements for her future without her knowledge, sent a surge of anger through Emma. You've been watching me all this time. Not directly. I respected the boundaries Sarah and Thomas established. But yes, I've known where you were. I made sure you were safe, that you had opportunities. I contributed anonymously to your school, to the community center you attend. It was the least I could do. The community center that had provided after-school care when Grandma was at her treatments. The school that had somehow found funding for the advanced math program Emma had qualified for despite budget cuts. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of invisible influence stretching back years. And my mother, do you know where she is? Why she left? Another heavy pause. Emma, I think that's a conversation better had in person. When I'm recovered, it's complicated. Everything about this is complicated, Emma shot back, frustration mounting. I deserve to know the truth. All of it. You do, Harrison agreed quietly. And you will. But not like this. Not over a rushed phone call in an airport. The key I gave you, it opens a safe deposit box at Boston Federal Bank. Central Branch. Inside is a letter from your mother, written before she left. It explains everything better than I can. A letter from her mother. Written years ago, but preserved, waiting for her. The thought sent a shiver through Emma. Half dread, half desperate hope. Miss Reynolds, the airline staff member who had brought the phone, was gesturing to her. I'm sorry, but they're beginning the boarding process for your flight. We need to wrap up this call. Emma nodded her understanding before returning to the phone. I have to go. We're boarding. I understand. Harrison's voice had weakened, suggesting the conversation had taxed his limited strength. Emma, I know this is overwhelming. I know you're angry and confused. You have every right to be, but please go to Boston. Meet with the lawyers. Read your mother's letter. Then, if you're willing, I'd like a chance to explain in person. The announcement for priority boarding came over the terminal speakers, adding urgency to the moment. I need to think about all this, Emma said honestly. It's too much. Of course. There was resignation in Harrison's tone, but also something like hope. Whatever you decide, whatever you think of me after learning everything, I want you to know one thing. From the moment I learned of your existence, I have never stopped thinking about you, wishing things could have been different. The raw emotion in his voice caught Emma off guard. This cold, entitled man she had observed on the plane now sounded broken, vulnerable, human. It complicated her emerging anger, added shades of gray to what she wanted to see in simple black and white. I have to go, she repeated, not knowing how else to respond. Goodbye, Emma, Be safe." She handed the phone back to the staff member, her mind whirling with new information and new questions. Grace waited nearby, concern evident in her expression. "How are you doing?" the older woman asked as they gathered their belongings and joined the boarding queue. "I don't know," Emma answered honestly. "It's like I've stepped into someone else's life. Nothing makes sense anymore." Grace nodded sympathetically. Family secrets have a way of doing that, turning everything upside down when they finally come to light. But you're strong, Emma. I can see that. Whatever you learn in Boston, whatever you decide to do with that knowledge, you'll find your way through. The return to Kentucky carried none of the turbulence or drama of the flight that had brought Emma to Boston. No medical emergencies, no frightening weather, no life-altering revelations mid-journey, just the steady hum of engines, occasional announcements from the captain, and the routine service of meals and drinks as the aircraft made its way across several states. Emma spent most of the flight staring out the window, her mind replaying the events of the past week. Before her departure, Robert Edwards Harrison's silver-haired lawyer with kind eyes that belied his formal demeanor had given her a sealed envelope containing the key details of her trust fund, contact information for both himself and Harrison, and most precious of all, her mother's original letter, which she had asked to keep. "Your grandmother will meet you at baggage claim," Edwards had informed her during their final meeting. "Mr. Harrison wanted to see you off at the airport, but felt his presence might complicate your departure. He asked me to convey his regards and to remind you that all arrangements going forward will proceed at your pace, according to your comfort." The consideration was both a relief and, oddly, a slight disappointment. Part of Emma had wanted to see Harrison once more before leaving Boston, to confirm that their conversations had been real, that the tentative connection they had established wasn't just a product of the intense, artificial environment of the lawyer's office. As the plane began its descent into Louisville, Emma felt a surge of mixed emotions: excitement to see her grandmother, anxiety about how their relationship might be different now that secrets had been revealed, uncertainty about how to incorporate the new knowledge of her parentage into her existing identity and daily life. The sight of Grandma Martha waiting at baggage claim thinner than when Emma had left, wearing her Sunday church hat despite it being a Wednesday, clutching her purse with both hands as she scanned the arriving passengers, brought tears to Emma's eyes. Whatever complications had been introduced into her life by the revelations in Boston, this fundamental relationship remained her anchor, her true north. "Grandma," she called, breaking into a run as soon as she cleared the security barrier. "There's my girl." Martha opened her arms, folding Emma in an embrace that smelled of familiar perfume and home. "Lord, I missed you something fierce." "I missed you too," Emma said, her voice muffled against her grandmother's shoulder. They held each other for a long moment, neither speaking, both absorbing the comfort of reunion after a separation that had encompassed far more than physical distance. "Let's get your bag and head home," Martha said finally, keeping one arm around Emma's shoulders as they moved toward the baggage carousel. "Mrs. Parker from next door made her famous chicken and dumplings for your homecoming dinner." The casual mention of ordinary life neighbors, home-cooked meals, familiar routines was exactly what Emma needed after the surreal intensity of her time in Boston. As they collected her suitcase and made their way to the parking lot where Mr. Stevens, their church deacon, waited to drive them home, she felt herself beginning to relax, to settle back into herself. The drive through Kentucky's rolling hills was a study in contrasts after Boston's urban landscape. Farmland stretched on either side of the highway, punctuated by small towns and roadside stands selling fresh produce. When they turned onto the gravel road leading to their trailer park, Emma felt a complex mixture of comfort and discomfort. This was home, the only one she'd ever known. Yet somehow it looked different through eyes that had glimpsed another world. When they pulled up to their trailer, Emma was surprised to see a small welcome committee gathered on their makeshift porch. Mrs. Parker from next door, Mr. Jenkins from the corner store, Emma's best friend Lily and her mother, Pastor Green from their church. A hand-painted banner hung from the railing, "Welcome home, Emma." "What's all this?" she asked, a lump forming in her throat at the unexpected display of community care. "Just folks who missed you," Martha said simply. "Word got around you were coming home today." The simple gathering neighbors sharing food on paper plates, Lily eagerly asking about Boston, Pastor Green offering a brief prayer of thanks for safe travels, was as far from the rarefied atmosphere of Edward's law office or the Four Seasons Hotel as could be imagined. Yet it was here, among these people who knew her, had watched her grow, had supported her and her grandmother through difficult times, that Emma felt most herself. Later, after the neighbors had departed, and the house was quiet except for the familiar sounds of Martha washing dishes in the kitchen, Emma sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. The weight of her experiences in Boston, the revelations about her parentage, the meeting with Harrison, the letter from her mother seemed simultaneously enormous and somehow manageable in the context of home. Martha joined her on the swing, the wooden slats creaking slightly beneath their combined weight. For a while, they simply rocked in comfortable silence, the rhythm soothing and familiar. "You want to talk about it?" Martha finally asked. "About him. About what happens now." Emma considered the question, sorting through the tangle of thoughts and feelings that had accompanied her home from Boston. "I told him I'd try phone calls," she said. "Maybe emails, just to see if there's anything there, anything worth building on." Martha nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging Emma's decision. "And how do you feel about that?" "Confused," Emma admitted. "Part of me is still angry at him for not being there all these years, at Mom for keeping the truth from me, even at you, sometimes." She glanced sideways at her grandmother, worried about causing hurt with her honesty. But Martha simply nodded again. "That's fair. Anger's a natural response to finding out you've been lied to, even when the lies came from a place of love and protection. But another part of me is curious," Emma continued, relieved by her grandmother's acceptance of her complicated feelings. "About him, about that side of my family, about what it might be like to have, I don't know, more people in my corner." "That's natural, too," Martha assured her. "Family's complicated, Emma. Always has been, always will be. It's not just blood that makes a family, it's choice, commitment, showing up day after day. Thomas showed up for you. I've tried to show up for you. This Harrison fellow, he's just starting that journey. And whether it leads anywhere meaningful is something only time will tell." The simple wisdom, delivered without judgment or agenda, helped clarify Emma's own thinking. "I don't have to decide everything right now. Do I?" "Lord, no," Martha chuckled. "You're 12 years old, child. You've got your whole life ahead to figure out what William Harrison means to you, what kind of relationship you want with him, if any at all. Take your time. Listen to your heart. The right path will make itself known." They rocked in silence for a while longer. The familiar sounds of their neighborhood at nightfall, distant dogs barking, children being called indoors, a car stereo thumping bass as it passed, creating a backdrop to their quiet communion. "We're still going to see Mom, right?" Emma asked eventually. "In Arizona?" "Yes, indeed," Martha confirmed. "Harrison called while you were in the air. He's made all the arrangements. If the doctors give their approval, we'll fly out next month." The prospect of seeing her mother after 5 years of absence, and now with the context of her mental illness and the truth about Emma's parentage, was both exciting and terrifying. Would her mother recognize her? Would she be lucid enough for meaningful conversation? Would seeing her help heal the wound of her departure, or simply reopen it? "What's she like now?" Emma asked softly. "When you talk to her on the phone?" Martha considered the question carefully. "She has good days and harder days. On the good days, she's almost like her old self, curious, intelligent, full of questions about you and your life. On the harder days, she gets confused, sometimes paranoid, sometimes just disconnected from reality." "Does she know about Harrison contacting me? About me learning the truth?" "Yes. I told her after your first call from Boston. She was having a good day, thankfully. She was worried about how you'd take it, but also relieved. I think carrying secrets is a heavy burden, especially for someone whose mind is already fragile." The knowledge that her mother was aware of these developments, had processed them in her own way, added another layer to Emma's evolving understanding of her family situation. It wasn't just about her and Harrison anymore, or even about her. Harrison and Martha. Her mother remained a part of this constellation, however distant and complicated her presence might be. "Do you think we'll ever be a normal family?" Emma asked, immediately recognizing the naivete of the question even as it left her lips. Martha smiled gently. "Child, there's no such thing as a normal family. Every family has its complications, its secrets, its wounds and healings. Some just hide them better than others." She patted Emma's hand. "But if you're asking whether we'll find our way to something that feels right, that provides you with the support and love you deserve, yes, I believe we will. It might not look like what you imagined, might include some people you never expected, might exclude others you thought would always be there. But we'll find our way." The simple assurance, offered without false promises or platitudes, comforted Emma more than any elaborate guarantees could have. 3 weeks later, on a sweltering July morning, Grandma Martha's health took a sudden turn for the worse. Emma woke to find her grandmother unable to get out of bed, her breathing labored, her skin pale and clammy. "I'm fine," Martha insisted, even as Emma frantically called 911. "Just need to rest a spell." But the paramedics who arrived minutes later shared none of Martha's casual attitude. They moved with urgent efficiency, attaching monitors, administering oxygen, exchanging medical terminology that meant nothing to Emma but sounded ominous. "We need to get her to the hospital right away," one of them told Emma as they prepared to transfer Martha to a stretcher. "Pack a small bag for yourself. You can ride with us." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, waiting rooms, and medical consultations. Pneumonia, the doctor said, complicated by Martha's weakened immune system from cancer treatments. They admitted her to the ICU, where machines beeped and nurses moved with quiet efficiency. Emma sat beside her grandmother's bed, holding her hand, terrified by how small and vulnerable Martha looked beneath the hospital sheets. "She's stabilized for now," the doctor told Emma late that afternoon, "but her condition is serious. Do you have someone who can stay with you? A parent or other adult relative?" Emma shook her head. "It's just me and Grandma." The doctor's brow furrowed. "I see. Well, I'm going to have social services come speak with you about temporary arrangements." Temporary arrangements. The word sent a chill through Emma. Foster care, the prospect that had always hovered at the edges of her consciousness since her mother left, kept at bay only by Martha's stubborn determination to keep their small family together despite illness and financial hardship. As twilight fell outside the hospital windows, Emma found herself alone in the ICU waiting room, contemplating a future that suddenly seemed frighteningly uncertain. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen, at the number she had programmed in but never called. William Harrison's private line. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Would he even answer? Would he care? Or had his interest in her been merely a temporary salve to his conscience? A brief moment of responsibility before returning to his privileged life, before she could decide. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Emma, there's a call for you at the nurse's station. A Mr. Harrison." Emma stared at the nurse in confusion. "But I didn't call him." The nurse shrugged. "He says he's a relative, that he was notified about your grandmother's hospitalization." Emma followed the nurse to the station, where she was handed a phone. "Hello, Emma?" Harrison's voice was clear and focused, so different from the weak whisper in the hospital in Portland. "I just heard about Martha. How is she? How did you know?" Emma asked, bypassing his question. A slight hesitation. "I asked to be notified if either of you were admitted to any hospital in the region. A precaution, given Martha's health situation." Emma felt a flash of indignation at this invasion of privacy, quickly followed by reluctant gratitude that anyone was checking on them. "She has pneumonia," Emma said. "They say she's stable. But it's serious. They want to know about temporary arrangements for me." "I see." Harrison's tone was measured, careful. "Emma, I can be there by morning. I'll arrange for the best specialist to consult on Martha's case, and we can discuss what's best for you while she recovers." "You don't have to do that," Emma said automatically, even as relief washed through her at the prospect of not facing this crisis alone. "I know I don't have to. I want to." Harrison paused. "That is, if you're comfortable with me coming. I understand if you're not." The consideration in his offer, the explicit acknowledgement of her agency in the decision, tipped the balance. "Yes," Emma said quietly. "I think that would be good. Thank you." True to his word. William Harrison arrived at the hospital at 7 a.m. the next morning, looking remarkably different from the imperious businessman Emma had observed on the plane. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis instead of a suit, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested he had traveled through the night to reach Kentucky. "Emma," he said when he saw her curled up in a waiting room chair, not attempting to hug her or make any physical contact, just acknowledging her presence with genuine concern. "How is she this morning?" "About the same," Emma replied. "They're letting me see her for 10 minutes every hour." Harrison nodded. "I've arranged for Dr. Patterson from Johns Hopkins to review her case. She's one of the country's leading pulmonologists. She'll be calling the attending physician here within the hour." Emma felt a twinge of discomfort at his easy deployment of resources and connections, even as she recognized the potential benefit to her grandmother. "The doctors here are good," she said defensively. "They're doing everything they can." "I'm sure they are," Harrison agreed readily. "The consultation is just to make sure we're exploring every option." He gestured to the empty chair beside her. "May I?" When Emma nodded, he sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "Have you eaten anything, slept?" Emma shook her head. Emma shook her. The truth was, she'd been too anxious to do either since Martha's admission. "There's a decent cafe across the street," Harrison said. "Why don't we get some breakfast? We can leave our numbers with the nurses and be back in 15 minutes. The simple, practical suggestion addressing her immediate physical needs without presuming too much made it easy for Emma to agree. As they walked to the cafe, Harrison kept pace with her, not rushing ahead or falling behind, just walking beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world, over pancakes that Emma mostly pushed around her plate. Harrison broached the subject that hovered between them. "I've spoken with Robert Edwards about the guardianship situation. Should Martha need extended recovery time?" Emma tensed. "I'm not going into foster care." "No one is suggesting that," Harrison assured her. "There are several options we could consider. My sister Charlotte lives in Nashville, not too far from here. She's aware of the situation and has offered to have you stay with her if needed. She's a literature professor at Vanderbilt." Emma blinked in surprise. "Your sister knows about me?" Harrison nodded. "She's known from the beginning. Charlotte was the one person in my life I could confide in about your mother, about you. She's been wanting to meet you for years." The revelation that she had an aunt, a blood relative who had known about her all this time, was yet another piece in the increasingly complex puzzle of her family history. "Another option," Harrison continued, "which Martha and I discussed briefly when I called her after our meeting in Boston, would be for your former teacher, Mrs. Parker, to serve as a temporary guardian. Your mother mentioned her in several letters as someone you trust. She lives nearby, I understand, which would mean minimal disruption to your life here." Emma remembered Mrs. Parker's welcome home chicken and dumplings, her kind smile at the small gathering at their trailer. "You've been talking to Grandma about all this behind my back." Harrison looked uncomfortable. "Not behind your back. Exactly. We've had a few conversations about contingency plans, given her health situation. Martha has been very clear about her priorities keeping you in your community, minimizing disruption, ensuring your education continues uninterrupted. I've simply been offering resources to help make those priorities possible." Emma pushed her plate away, suddenly angry, not at Harrison specifically, but at the entire situation, adults making plans about her life, her mother's absence, her grandmother's illness, the years of secrecy. "I'm tired of everybody deciding things for me," she said, her voice rising slightly. "My whole life has been people keeping secrets and making choices for my own good without ever asking what I want. Harrison didn't flinch at her outburst. "You're right," he said simply, "and I apologize for contributing to that pattern. What do you want, Emma? Not what do you think Martha wants, or what you think I want to hear. What do you want?" The direct question, asked without condescension or dismissal, caught Emma off guard. What did she want? In the immediate term, she wanted her grandmother to recover. But beyond that, "I want to stay in school with my friends," she said slowly. "I want to keep living in our trailer, even though it's not fancy. I want to see my mom and understand why she left. I want to know more about you and your sister, but I don't want to leave Kentucky. Not yet. And I want—" She hesitated, then pushed ahead. "I want people to stop lying to me, even when the truth is complicated or messy." Harrison listened intently, nodding slightly. When she finished, he said, "Those all sound like reasonable wants to me. I can't promise that Martha will recover quickly or completely. That's beyond my control. But I can promise to support whatever living arrangement keeps you in your community, to facilitate visits with your mother, to introduce you to Charlotte at whatever pace feels comfortable, and to be honest with you going forward, even when it's difficult." He leaned forward slightly. "And Emma, I want you to know that whatever happens with Martha's health, you will not be alone. There are people prepared to care for you, to ensure your education continues uninterrupted, to provide stability during difficult times. Whether I am one of those people is your choice, but the support system exists regardless." Emma studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. She found none, just the tired eyes of a man who had traveled through the night to reach the hospital bedside of a woman he barely knew. For the sake of a daughter he was just beginning to know. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's go back and see if the doctor has any updates." The facility where her mother resided was nothing like the institutional setting Emma had imagined based on TV shows and movies. Located on the outskirts of Sedona, it resembled a luxury resort more than a hospital. Low adobe buildings nestled against red rock formations, flowering desert plants lining winding paths, a sense of tranquility pervading the carefully designed spaces. "Your mother is having a good day." Dr. Littlefeather, the psychiatrist who had overseen Sarah's care for the past 5 years, informed them after their initial orientation. "She's been preparing for your visit for weeks, working with her therapist to manage her emotions, practicing grounding techniques to help her stay present." Will she know me?" Emma asked. The question that had kept her awake on the flight west finally finding voice. Dr. Littlefeather's expression was kind but honest. "Yes, she'll know you. Emma, her memory isn't the issue. She remembers you clearly and speaks of you often. The challenge is maintaining connection to present reality when emotions become overwhelming. If she begins to seem distant or confused during your visit, it's not because she doesn't recognize you or care. It's simply her mind's way of protecting itself from emotional overload." The explanation helped prepare Emma for the moment when, after being escorted through a sunlit atrium filled with indoor plants and quiet seating areas, she first saw her mother after 5 years of absence. Sarah Reynolds sat in a small garden courtyard, her back to the entrance, apparently absorbed in sketching something on a pad balanced on her knees. She was thinner than Emma remembered, her once close-cropped hair now grown out into auburn curls that caught the Arizona sunlight. But when she turned at the sound of their approach, the familiar dimple appeared in her right cheek, the same dimple Emma saw in her own mirror each morning. "Emma," her mother breathed, the sketch pad sliding forgotten from her lap as she stood. "Oh my God, look at you." The 5 years of separation, the revelations about Harrison, the complicated history that had led to this moment all seemed to condense into the simple fact of physical presence. Her mother was here, solid and real, looking at her with eyes that held clear recognition and love. "Mom," Emma managed, the single syllable carrying years of longing, confusion, anger, and hope. They moved toward each other slowly, neither rushing the moment that had been so long in coming. When they finally embraced, Emma found herself cataloging sensory details, the lavender scent of her mother's shampoo, different from the coconut she remembered from childhood, the surprising boniness of her shoulders beneath the loose cotton dress, the slight tremor in her hands as they came to rest on Emma's back. "You've grown so much," Sarah said as they separated enough to look at each other properly. "You're not my little girl anymore." "I'm still me," Emma said, suddenly desperate to reassure her mother that the connection between them remained despite the years and revelations. "Yes, you are," Sarah agreed, her eyes drinking in every detail of Emma's face. "Still my brave, brilliant girl, just taller now, more yourself." Martha had remained slightly apart during this initial reunion, allowing mother and daughter their moment. Now she stepped forward, her own emotions evident in the slight trembling of her chin despite her composed expression. "Sarah," she said softly, "you're looking well." "Mama," Sarah acknowledged, reaching out one hand while keeping the other on Emma's shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear if not maintained in physical contact. "Thank you for bringing her, for taking care of her all these years." The 3 generations of Reynolds women stood in a triangle of connection, each bearing the marks of the complicated journey that had brought them to this sun-drenched garden in Arizona. Martha's resilience despite illness and hardship, Sarah's fragility and hard-won stability, Emma's emerging understanding of her place within this complex family constellation. "Shall we sit?" Sarah suggested, gesturing to a small grouping of comfortable chairs arranged beneath a pergola draped with desert vines. "I've been looking forward to this for so long." The conversation that followed was both ordinary and extraordinary updates on Emma's schooling, stories from the neighborhood, questions about the facility and Sarah's daily life there. Beneath the surface of these mundane exchanges ran deeper currents, the unspoken acknowledgement of years lost, of truths recently revealed, of relationships forever altered by absence and revelation. "You know about William now," Sarah said eventually, addressing directly what had been hovering at the edges of their conversation. "You've met him?" Emma nodded. "On the plane, and then in Boston. We've emailed a few times since I got back home." She hesitated, then asked the question that had weighed on her for months. "Are you angry with me for seeing him?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Emma, no, not at all. That's your choice to make. I never wanted to keep you from knowing him forever just until you were old enough to understand the complexity of it all." "He was there," Emma said quietly. "When Grandma got sick, he came to Kentucky, Arranged for specialists. Made sure I had someone to stay with. He didn't have to do that. Sarah's expression softened. No, he didn't. But I'm glad he did. She reached out to take Emma's hand. I've known William a long time. Emma, he's flawed, as we all are. But there is goodness in him. A capacity for care that gets buried under layers of caution and control. He said you two have been in contact, Emma said. That he visits you here? Yes, Sarah confirmed. 4 times a year, like clockwork. At first, I refused to see him. Eventually, I agreed partly out of curiosity, partly because the structure of this place makes such encounters safe, controlled. What do you talk about? Sarah smiled slightly. You? Primarily. He brings photos, sometimes school events he's attended covertly, community center activities, ordinary moments captured from a distance. We talk about your development, your education, your future. It's the one subject on which we have always been aligned, the desire to see you thrive, even if we've had very different roles in making that possible. The image of these 2 people, her biological parents, separated by circumstance, choice, and illness, finding common ground in their concern for her welfare, was both touching and slightly unnerving. All these years, while she had been unaware of Harrison's existence, her parents had been maintaining this strange, distant connection centered on her. As the visit drew to a close, with Dr. Littlefeather discreetly signaling that Sarah was approaching her limit for sustained interaction, Emma felt both fulfilled and hungry, for more grateful for these precious hours with her mother, yet acutely aware of all the ordinary moments of connection they had missed and would continue to miss. "Can I come back?" she asked as they prepared to say goodbye in the same garden where they had reunited hours earlier. Visit again. "I would like that very much," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her eyes revealed the emotional toll of the day. "Dr. Littlefeather thinks regular visits might be possible now that we've established this initial connection, perhaps not frequent, given the distance and my variable condition, but periodic, something to build on, to build." Why? The prospect of incorporating these visits into her life, of creating a relationship with her mother that acknowledged the limitations of her illness while nurturing the love and connection that remained, gave Emma a sense of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her mother's departure 5 years earlier. As summer gave way to fall, a new pattern gradually established itself in Emma's life, one that incorporated her expanded awareness of her origins and the tentative new connections that awareness had made possible. Martha recovered from pneumonia. Though the episode had scared them both and led to improved home health care arrangements, funded through the trust Harrison had established. Quarterly visits to Arizona became part of Emma's routine, sometimes with Martha. Sometimes, as her grandmother's health stabilized and her own comfort with travel increased, on her own, with all arrangements handled seamlessly by Edward's office. In our twilight years, we often reflect on the roads not taken, the words left unspoken, the secrets we've kept in the name of protection or pride. Emma's journey reminds us that it's never too late to bridge the gaps between us and those we love. How many of us have withheld truths, thinking we're shielding our children or grandchildren from pain, only to create deeper wounds through silence? Perhaps there's someone in your life right now, a child, a sibling, an old friend waiting for you to reach across the divide with honesty and an open heart. Remember Martha's wisdom. Family ain't just who you're born to, it's who would catch you when you fall. The clock ticks for all of us, dear friends,